Hello, everyone, and welcome to the My Healthy Home Summit. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Caroline Blazovsky. I'm a national healthy home expert and environmental residential consultant with over 24 years of experience. This summit is designed to educate you about the process of creating a healthy home, to learn how our homes may affect our health and wellness, and the benefits associated with living and working in healthier spaces. We've compiled the most decorated speakers in this arena to help you on this journey. Today, we are joined by guest Joseph Lstiburek, who will be discussing home building failures and how preventing them can help us create a healthy home. Welcome, Joseph Lstiburek. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you.
It's an honor and a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
As one of the founders of the Home Building Science Arena and a world-renowned forensic building investigator, can you start by giving us a quick synopsis of your background?
Well, I started as a builder. My father was a builder. He was actually an aeronautical engineer that then got into home building, and I studied aerospace. My undergraduate is in aerospace, so when somebody says it's not rocket science, I can actually say, yeah, it's probably not rocket science. But when I graduated with a rocket science degree, I couldn't get a job, so I ended up back in construction. And the best thing that ever happened to me was when I graduated, I couldn't get a job in my chosen profession and ended up asking simple questions like, why are you doing it this way? And what about that? And I got adopted by what turned out to be the legends. I had no idea. They were just, can't believe this young punk kid is asking all these questions. And then I knew I'd accidentally found where I needed to be. And then as I got more experienced and my questions got more irritating to the oldsters is, okay, young Joseph, get your master's. So I got my master's degree and then the oldsters, Steve, got to do your doctorate. And I was starting my doctoral work, and finally one of the legends, Handegard, called me up because I was taking too many years to finish. He says, you're an irritation. You're going to be the first person that gets an honorary doctorate before his real one. Finish the goddamn thing, okay? I want to go to my grave knowing that you actually finished something. And so I got my doctorate. So I have 3 engineering degrees, but in my heart, I'm still a home builder.
And I know you have engineering degrees and backgrounds. Can you just describe that a little bit about what your degrees are in and where you focused your career primarily?
Well, my undergraduate degree is in aerospace. My specialty was airflow. My master's degree is in civil engineering, and civil engineering in Canada is where the home of building science is, because civil engineering is where you have soil mechanics, and soil mechanics handles the fundamental equations of water flow and vapor flow in porous materials. Well, what are buildings made out of? Porous materials, and the only way to understand them is to understand the fundamentals of soil mechanics. In the United States, building science is centered in the mechanical engineering departments, and there's been this confusion. So in Canada and Europe, it's civil engineering in the physics department. In the United States, it's the mechanical department. And then I got my doctorate in engineering physics all at the University of Toronto. So I'm incompetent in 3 different professions.
So let's just kind of jump right into healthy homes. I mean, you are one of the founders, the innovators of this industry. And I think, how many times have we heard the story that I've built my home and now I'm sick in it? Or I've moved into a new home and I don't feel well. And so I think I'd like to kind of talk about that just a little bit and get your opinion on some of the basic, like, let's just talk about one of the biggest or top 3 biggest problems we see in homes where it affects us health wise, or what do you think they are?
Well, okay. Don't build your house out of stupid stuff. Don't do stupid stuff in your house. And try not to over humidify your building and control the rain. What's bugging me, and you're going to be therapy for me a little bit, Carolyn, and here's what
Good.
it if you can't do math or physics, you become a doctor. And if you can't do medicine, join the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, okay? And they're not understanding that their recommendations for air change and relative humidity are actually destroying the building and making the building itself the cause of what they're trying to protect people from. And this is very irritating to me. You know, somebody watches This Old House once and they have a degree in medicine and they're going to now tell you how to operate your house, or they become an activist, and that drives me crazy. The biggest thing that we have happening to us is our buildings are getting too wet, and they're staying wet, and they're deteriorating, and the deterioration products are making people sick. And your question should be, well, Joe, we've been building a long time. What's happening now? What's different now? Well, it's okay for things to get wet if they get dry. Wetting followed by drying, whoa, 2 thumbs up from the old guy. That would be me. What's happened is that people don't understand that drying requires an exchange of energy. And in the old days, we were living in energy pigs. You know, we had tremendous energy movement from the inside out and the outside in. And that energy flow caused things to dry. Now we've altered significantly the energy exchange. That means that water that we used to consider to be incidental is no longer incidental. Let me give you an example. There are only 2 kinds of windows in the world: windows that leak and windows that will leak. So what do we know about windows? They leak. It gets worse. Windows are like people. When windows and people get old, we leak. You youngsters have no idea what's coming to you. In the old days, we called that leakage incidental water, because it would leak into a wall that was made out of 100-year-old wood, 1,000-year-old bricks and rocks, and it would go, it'd get wet, and it would dry, end of story.
No big deal.
Now, we don't build out of real wood. I view engineered wood as an insult to engineers and to wood. I view OSB as the spam of wood. I view spam as the OSB of luncheon meats. Youngsters get amazed when I say we used to go to places called forests. We would cut trees down and cut them into boards and build boats out of them and sail them around the world. Try doing that with a sheet of OSB. Now,
let's explain, just because a lot of our audience doesn't know. We know what MDF, medium density fiber board, and OSB, oriented strand board, is, but our audience doesn't. So just tell them a little bit about the difference between regular wood and these manufactured and engineered woods that we see now.
Well, it's like the difference between North Carolina barbecue and Texas barbecue. In Texas, we actually use real hunks of meat. North Carolina, we run the meat through a grinder and slap it on white bread and put turpentine on it. So, in the old days, we would take old trees and we would cut them into large pieces. Now we take young trees and we flake them and then swoosh them together with goopy stuff. And so we're basically creating a flake board or a particle board product, as opposed to what Mother Nature did, which was a large piece of real wood. Now, real wood evolved into then the second stage was we would peel the tree. And then we'd peel the tree and have layers, and we would call that plywood. So plywood would be a sheet product with actual layers of peeled tree. And that got expensive because they were cutting down old trees and running out of old trees, and they had to be big. So we started taking younger trees and flaking them. And so the modern flaked woods, which would be OSB, have a lot more wood surface area that's covered with adhesives and goopy stuff, whereas the original 100 and 1,000-year-old tree didn't have any of that stuff. Also, the new products do not behave the same way as the old products. And it's not that we can't use the new products. We can. We just have to use them differently. But we're not building them differently. We're building the same way we used to with the old stuff. One more example. In the old days, we would skim the inside of our buildings with plaster. Now we have paper-faced drywall. We're lining the inside of our buildings with paper. We're building paper buildings. Even the dumbest of the three little pigs didn't build his house out of paper, all right? So what are the odds that we're going to go back to building out of 100 and 1,000-year-old trees with plaster? It's not going to happen. So we have to change the way we use our new materials, engineered products, to compensate for the change of energy and compensate for the change in durability. Well, we have to get rid of concrete. Well, okay, well, we're going to build with wood, but we can't use real wood, so we have to use wood. It was wood once, but it ain't wood before. We need to replace concrete. Well, you can do all of those things, but you can't do it the way we were doing it with the old stuff. You think that's enough of a problem? With a clean sheet of paper and a new house, we can do that. It's not fun, but we can do that. But now take an old building that's been perfectly happy for a long time and change the energy flow and change the interior humidity and listen to the pundits, and you're going to destroy the building. And the only people that are happy are the fire people, because the buildings are too wet to burn.
Mm-mm-mm. So we know, and as I sit and look around, you'll probably enjoy this, but my office building is a old 1800s, 1900s building with plaster walls, steam baseboard, oil heat, and leaks like a sieve. But when you get water, it dries out. And in the new construction with energy efficiency, tight building envelope, there's no drying, it occurs. And so we get all of this moisture and mold.
Yes. And so can we build with the new stuff and have it survive? And the answer is, well, we have to reduce the drying. We have to reduce the wetting, and we have to increase the drying. And we have to do that while we're reducing the energy exchange. And all of those things seem contrary, but they're not. It's different, and we consider it to be difficult now. But look, when we went from log construction to frame construction, oh my God, that was complicated. You know, and I'm saying it's going to become normal and easy, but we're not proactive, we're reactive. Failures drive innovation and change. My favorite quote about America and Americans comes from Winston Churchill. And he said, "Americans can always be counted upon to do the right thing after all of the alternatives have been exhausted." So we're simply going through failures and reacting to the failures and fixing. And so I point out that failure has made me the man that I am today, because you learn a lot from a failure if you're paying attention. Then you change to avoid the failure and subsequent things. I just would want us to go through the failure stage quickly without a huge number of them. And unfortunately, we're 300 million people, and that's just us. And we're building stuff like there's no tomorrow. And I'm nervous that we're not building it the right way. And so, what do I tell? I have grandchildren now. What do I tell youngsters? I said, it's okay to get an old house, because hopefully the old house hasn't been fixed. Then you can fix it correctly. Well, what about a new house? When you get a new house, get it right away and change the dumb things in it quickly. And that's my career.
That's right. And this morning I had a client call me, and they said, we just built a brand new house, and we built they built it in New Jersey, New York area. They built a slab, which I have my own feeling about slabs when you're in 4 season climates, and I don't really like them too much. And they feel sick in their home. And it's filled with all kinds of products that we're talking about, these engineered materials. And now we've got clients who don't feel well. So this creates such a challenge for us. Um, what do you think are the top, let's say, 2 or 3 problems that contribute most to health problems in a home? So, what would you say you see the most of? And something I think that our audience can really relate to and start to look at and possibly fix.
Well, the most common is mold, moldy buildings. Now, that's averaging old and new buildings, old and new houses. If you're asking me what's the most common problem in a new house, is that it's off-gassing of the adhesives and materials that we shouldn't be building out of. I mean, my comment is that you should not build out of stupid stuff and you should not do stupid things. And volatile organic compounds typically get emitted as the temperature and humidity goes up. Now, I don't have a problem with organic compounds. I'm going to I'm going to translate things a little bit. It's okay to build out of stupid stuff if the stupid stuff stays in the stuff. All right? It's not okay to build out of stupid stuff if the stupid stuff gets out of the stuff. So, semi-volatile organic compounds have a huge benefit over volatile organic compounds. In other words, if the stuff stays in the stuff, I'm okay with that. Then you just have to tell people not to eat it or lick it. Don't laugh. You have kids, all right? And kids eat things and lick things. And I mean, I forgot about that. Now I got grandkids that are licking and eating. And, I live in a 180-year-old house, so they can lick all they want. And I'm hoping that they do lick, because in their immune system, that's another story we're gonna avoid. But so the biggest issue in new houses is that we're building out of materials that off gas. The second biggest thing is that we're, believe it or not, is going to freak you out, we're overventilating. We're bringing in too much air because the excess of air change is bringing in moisture. And because our buildings are so energy efficient, the air conditioning systems don't dehumidify. You might not know this, but one of the reasons that I'm famous, wait for it, is that I pointed out that air conditioners are dehumidifiers, but they only dehumidify when they're running.
Yes, of course.
Oh, man, a career is waiting for me. So what have we done to the runtime of air conditioners? The duty cycles, the runtime was 50, 60%. Now it's 20%. Well, why? Because we have great windows. Yay! Great windows. We have great lights. They don't emit heat. Whoa! We're saving energy. We have great refrigerators. We have great everything. And the greater it is, the less energy that it generates, less heat is provided. We're also insulating up the wazoo. That's 2 yin-yangs. Those are metric terms. And so because we've gotten so energy efficient, we have so little heat generation, the air conditioners don't run enough. And so if you're to build a new house to the 2021 or the new 2024 IRC, International Residential Code, International Energy Conservation Code, the air conditioning systems are not going to be able to run enough to dehumidify. So you're going to have to install a dehumidifier. So remember the movie called The Graduate? I mean, I'm old enough to remember that.
Of course.
Where the future was plastics. The future is dehumidifiers. Now, that's in the South. When you go to the North, like to Canada, that's the third world nation to the north of us, where there are only 2 seasons, this winter and last winter, the high air change rate ends up making the buildings too dry. And so they're now adding humidifiers. And humidifiers I view as bioweapons, because they generate such bad stuff. I mean, the Mayo Clinic has it figured out. They're basically saying if you're going to use a humidifier, you have to use distilled water. You have to clean it every other day. I see that all the time, don't you, Carolyn? We're always using
I
distilled
take them
water.
off when I do home inspections. They get removed.
Oh,
They are a plethora of stagnant water with bacteria, Legionella.
all right.
These, and
So guess what? If I have a tight house, tighter than a Scotsman in a bar, and then I overventilate it, I'm going to create a humidity problem in the south and a lack of a humidity problem, which is another humidity problem in the north. And I can live with a dehumidifier. I can't live with a humidifier. So what we now have to do is use energy recovery, an ERV, to maintain that, to not be penalized. So we have the technology. It just means, everybody is going to need an energy recovery ventilator, regardless of the climate. And we're going to want to not have humidifiers. Or if we have them, there have to be pristine. Good luck with that. Okay.
right.
If somebody invents a really low cost, non bad humidification system, let me know. I'll invest my retirement. Okay. So I want to be tight. I want to ventilate right, and ventilate right is half the rate that the EPA, the energy and the Energy Star program and ASHRAE Standard 62.2 call for, which is a real problem if you're going to be a licensed engineer or licensed architect. So we design our buildings to be able to meet the Energy Star and the 62.2 ventilation rate, but we commission the building at the IRC residential rate. See, I won the fight for the ventilation rate residentially in the code, but I lost it in ASHRAE. And there's
Explain to our audience, because a lot of people listening to us don't know what ASHRAE is and they don't know what these codes are. And they assume when they buy a home that they're completely protected and that a house is built under so many standards and there's no way they could move into a home and have any kind of issue related to their health. So explain a little bit about these organizations, how they work, and really how minimal the standards are, because they're really not what people think.
Let's talk about the codes for a minute. I've been participating in the code making arena now since the last time my Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup, which is a half century ago. So it's a long time. You have a room full of literally 150, 250 people that are code officials. And they say, all right, code 32B proposal. All those in favor, raise your hand. And you have 2 minutes to talk about the code. And, it's like, okay, all of you that feel that it's okay to violate the second law of thermodynamics and gravity, raise your hands. And so we got so much stuff that makes absolutely no sense. And so let me put it to this way. If you build to the code, which by the way is the worst way you can build without legally going to jail, right? Code is the worst that you can do. It's not the best that you can do. You're likely to get into trouble. So you build to the code minimum, and then you add stuff to stay out of trouble. So what do I add? Well, I add a dehumidifier. I add an energy recovery ventilator. Then what do I worry? I worry about carbon monoxide. See, I live under a very simple premise. You shouldn't kill people and you shouldn't make them sick. I know it's hard to believe that, people argue about that. So you shouldn't kill people and you shouldn't make them sick. I one day we'll agree that might be a goal. And so what will kill you? Well, carbon monoxide. And the thing is that, if I'm going to have a gas water heater, I'm going to want to have it sealed combustion so that the products of combustion can't possibly get into the house. If I'm going to have a gas boiler or gas furnace, it's going to be 98% efficient sealed combustion. So the term is that it's aerodynamically uncoupled from the enclosure, meaning the building, the house, the apartment, the unit doesn't know that it's there. And so Well, what was happening in the old days? In the old days, we had these things called chimneys. But for chimneys to move, air had to leave out of the chimney. Well, if I'm burning stuff and air is moving out of the chimney, woohoo! Well, where did the air come from that had to go up the chimney? It came from the leaky building. Well, what did we do? Well, we made the building tight. Then we put in these big fans, and sometimes the building, well, a lot of times the building would go to a negative pressure. So air was pulled down the chimney and people would die. And so we got rid of traditional chimneys because they no longer worked. We have to replace them with sealed combustion, aerodynamically uncoupled combustion appliances, and that's a big deal. So I'm not anti-gas. I just want it to be ultra sealed combustion and efficient. Well, what about a gas cooktop? Oh God. All right. It's okay to cook with gas if the stuff that you're burning is captured by your hood and goes to the outside. The people who design the hoods are interior designers. Oh, it looks cute. It doesn't freaking work. I want one that works and also can look good, which means that it's got to be bigger than the cooktop, deeper than the cooktop, and it has to suck, but enough to capture. Well, if that happens and I'm in a tight house, I don't want to suck the replacement air from a bad place. If I have a very large exhaust fan cooktop and I'm in Michigan and I connect it to, I have a garage attached to it, we call that the Kerouacian option. Grandfather humor. Kerouacian, we had carbon monoxide. He would kill people deliberately. Mm-hmm. You have a garage, you have a car, your house is negative. You don't want to pull the stuff out of your garage. So we don't want to be too negative. Well, what does a cooktop do? Well, it makes the house negative. So you have to have replacement air. And believe it or not, we've figured this out in places called restaurants. We do that really well. We don't do it well at all in a house. Just once would I love to see, 300, 400 CFM range hood with an interlock makeup air system that somebody actually sells. Well, Joe, what do you do? Well, I cook outside, even in the winter. And when I run the range hood, which I designed, which doesn't look great, but it's functional, I open the door for the makeup. You're kidding. You have 3 engineering degrees and you haven't been able to design, well, not a low cost one that works. I don't want a Ferrari running my ventilation system. So I'm just opening the door. Well, that's kind of primitive. I said, well, yeah, it is. Well, if you want to spend, $2,000 or $3,000 on a range hood that we can install in a restaurant, knock yourself out. I'm successful, but I'm not that successful. I'm not going to spend several $1,000s on a range hood. Now, of course, I will spend $1,000 on a refrigerator. Those priorities here.
How about the flush? While we're talking about ventilation a little bit in the kitchen, my dad just had I had him put in a flush mount. So I went with a flush mount instead of doing a range hood that goes over your range or a downdraft, which worked terribly. I had him go with a flush mount that opened up. Now he's pulling a lot of CFM because it's quite strong. So what I did was I installed extra, their vents, if you will, that have a flap for people who don't understand.
Yeah, balance. Yeah.
So I had those installed in the kitchen with the flush mount. What do you think about an idea like that? Because he didn't have access to windows and doors to open while he cooks.
Well, the answer is that works just fine. The problem is that it can also make you insanely cold.
Yes.
I'm going to throw some numbers out at you, and it's not in the standard size, according to the NHB, of the kitchen range hood that's going in a new house, 2,500, 3,000 square foot house, is around 700 CFM, 700 cubic feet per minute of exhaust. And a house that now has to be built to 3 air changes per hour at 50 pascals, which is what the code calls for a 2,500 square foot house, I get enough of a negative pressure, I could suck a golf ball down a garden hose a mile long, all right? That's insane. So you have to have some kind of way of providing makeup air, and people aren't doing it. Your way of doing it works, except now, where is that air coming from? If you have a basement, I like that cold air to come into the basement. The basement tempers that air, and then I have floor registers at my range hood. And so I've actually done that. So I actually have a system that works. So why don't I keep using it? And the answer is, well, I also keep my wine in my basement and it gets too cold. So I open the door.
It's perfect. It's everyone needs to know that when you do one thing, it's another. There's no perfect home. It's these trade-offs that we're learning as we go.
We call it the Rosanna Dana effect. If it's not one thing, it's another, right?
Right. Amazing. So if you're going to build the perfect home for health, and this is your opinion, and probably I'll agree with it, what key concepts do you think we have to put into that building?
Well, I want to make it insanely airtight. I want to put an awful lot of continuous insulation on the outside of my framing so that when I have moisture inside the house, it doesn't accumulate in a cold wall. I'm making the wall warm by insulating it on the outside. Think of it as pulling a sweater over the outside of you. The approach today is we basically put in fluffy stuff in the framing. That's like eating a sweater. So I want you to be a sweater wearer, not a sweater eater. So put your insulation on the outside, and the sweater gets thicker where you get colder. And then the idea is that I could easily live with 30% interior relative humidity in the middle of the winter in a cold place. And believe it or not, that actually is reasonable from a health perspective for a human. It's not reasonable from a health perspective for a building. So you have to understand, when the Harvard School of Public Health and others did their studies, they did them on humans, not humans in buildings. And the reason we want the higher humidity for a human is that the lungs are tiny micro air ducts that end up in a little balloon. So you've got a whole bunch of tiny ducts with balloons on the end of them. And the balloons are alveoli, and that's where the gas exchange happens. And when the humidity is high in the alveoli, your body has natural resistance. And Dr. Stephanie Taylor finally proved that, and she's magnificent. You ought to have her as a guest. She's the only architect who's also a licensed MD, and she skydives and raises dogs. This is a wicked sense of humor. Okay, and that's who you want. So so I have no issues with that, the higher humidity for the lungs. And the second thing that the higher humidity does is that when you have particles floating around in the air, the water molecules in the vapor form attach themselves to the particles. So the particles get bigger and they plate out. So believe it or not, a higher humidity has fewer contaminants in the air because they're plating out. You're increasing the falling velocity. The only people that don't understand this are the medical community, but I have enough trouble with them. The trouble is that the higher humidity, which is good for your lungs and is good for reducing the contaminants in the air, leads to problems in the building. So the building then becomes the contaminant. So you're getting the contaminant, you're becoming better, but you're in a place that's becoming worse because the building enclosure isn't able to handle it. And in a new building, if you insulate it well on the outside, it can handle the higher humidity in a colder place. Woo-hoo. The second thing that, well, there's more than one thing. So sealed combustion appliances, build your building with a sweater, and the warmth of the sweater depends on where you are. The other is you want to have really good filtration. And we got insanely good filters. You have a MERV 14, the higher the number, the better. The typical one is like MERV 8 or 9. So you go to a MERV 14, which is thicker, and you circulate the air, you filter out like a lot of stuff. But we don't design our air conditioning and heating ductwork to be able to handle the airflow necessary to do that. We do it in hospitals. We want 4 to 5 air changes per hour in a room. And we don't want air from the outside coming in. We're just talking circulation air that we can filter. That means we would have to double the size of the HVAC ductwork and increase slightly the size of the fan power to be able to filter all of that air. Now, believe it or not, during the COVID craziness, and don't get me going on that, we had some people develop some portable filter boxes, Corsi something or other system, and that was magnificent. So you actually take, 1, 2, 4, 5, basically MERV 14 filters and tape them together, put a fan in them, and you're creating this incredibly effective ventilation system. I mean, as an engineer, I like looking at that stuff, but it looks like crap, except to me. So, wow, that's beautiful. But it would be nice to build that into your mechanical system. Now, there are some insanely clever mechanical contractors that can do that, and then there are some insanely unable to do that contractors. So, build it tight, wear a sweater, sealed combustion appliances, capture over your range hood when you're cooking, add filtration, and put materials in that the stuff stays in the stuff. Then don't do stupid stuff inside, like don't rebuild your carburetor in your living room kitchen, okay? Don't strip your furniture in your guest room don't. In the old days, wild animals would kill and eat the weak and the stupid to get them out of the gene pool. It was a pretty good system. Now they do stupid stuff in buildings. And I'm saying, I can give you a really good building, but maybe you shouldn't fill it with bad stuff and do stupid stuff in it, right? So
Correct.
if you look around, we got an 1840 building and I got plaster everywhere. I got antiques. Well, it's because you're an antique, Joe. Well, no, they're old. They've given up all of their nasty stuff, and
Outcast.
I'm like, okay, that's kind of neat. Well, then what? Technology is going to eventually save us. I know it's hard to believe, but here goes. We should ventilate according to what's actually in the air in the space, as opposed to what an unnamed irresponsible committee on ASHRAE or the building code says you have to ventilate at. So it's coming, maybe another year or two, we'll have, sensors that can actually measure volatile organic compounds and other contaminants that are going to be less than $1,000. Now, in commercial buildings, we can spend 20 grand on a series of sensors, but as they become affordable, we will only ventilate according to what we actually measure, as opposed to taking a guess and assuming that we have to protect the 1% of the population that deserve to have been eaten by the wild animals. So basically, irresponsible, stupid people are the reason that we have incredibly high ventilation rates. If you're responsible and not stupid and don't do stupid stuff, you don't need to ventilate as high. This is not a pop. I'm no longer a member of ASHRAE 62.2. I mean, I'm an ASHRAE fellow. I'm famous. I've got 1,000 peer-reviewed papers, but Joe, they don't want to hear that. Well, okay. I'll talk to Carolyn and maybe she'll have other people hear it.
That's right. And I think the question too becomes, we make these recommendations and we lack contractors who understand our philosophy. And the homeowner is left feeling disenchanted. They get this brand new home, they move into it, and then they start to say, or contact people like us, I've got problems, I've got moisture, I have condensation on my ductwork, my children have asthma, I can't breathe in my home. And then people like Joe and I start recommending dehumidifiers, ERVs, increasing ventilation. So where do we get in touch, or how do we get them to get in touch with contractors that know what we're talking about? What do you think is like the best resource? Because people ask me all the time, well, where do I go to find a good contractor, or how do I find one?
Well, believe it or not, professionals are worried about this, and we get together. And so, believe it or not, the local home builders associations have monthly meetings, and they talk about these things. And so, the local AIA architects, American Institute for Architects, have their meetings. We have, believe it or not, we have some of this localities have things called BECs, Building Enclosure Councils. So this is where professionals and practitioners get together to not bond and drink alcohol and tell stories, but they get together to basically exchange information. And did you hear about this and whatever? And they're providing ongoing education to their membership. And so I recommend connecting the National Association of Home Builders and ask them what are their local home building organizations, and start talking to them. I'd contact the local chapter of the American Institute for Architects and say, what are your meetings and what's going on? And that's how we're doing it. The professionals recognize, and the practitioners recognize, that there are issues, and we're beginning to network amongst ourselves. So part of this is we educate ourselves so that we can help everybody else stay out of trouble. I know you're looking at me like I'm too optimistic. Well, no, look, we went through a whole bunch of stuff over many generations. I mean, we used to have buildings burn like crazy, and now in the United States, we build out of stuff that burns, but it doesn't burn. I mean, that's a remarkable achievement. It took a century, but we solved it. Buildings used to fall down and used to blow away. That doesn't happen anymore. The reason that structural engineers are so boring is nothing ever happens anymore. You want excitement. Talk to a mechanical engineer, nothing works, and they blame the architect. That's a Joe-ism. But so the groups and the professionals are now communicating, and the answer is we need to communicate with them. And I'll tell you something. They're absolutely thrilled when civilians want to interact. Oh man, yeah. Can you tell us how best we can communicate? And what that means is that they're recognizing that there's a business and marketing opportunity as well. See, it's really nice to make money not making people sick and making them happy and comfortable. It's amazing because then they refer you to other people. They don't teach this anymore, at the MBA schools. But I'm just saying that you're competent, you do stuff, and you make people happy. You get business. I know, old school.
You've worked on some amazing homes. So I kind of want to touch on that just a little bit so people understand I don't know what you can say and what you can't, but you've worked on some really, really famous homes. You've worked on some really intricate homes and some of the best of the best. So can you share a couple stories or things that you've worked on?
Well, a gentleman who has a car company named after him had a problem, and it was in a hot, humid climate. It was the first building that we turned into an unvented conditioned attic because the ductwork was in the attic and it was leaking. And I said, hey, nobody's ever done this before, but why don't we move the insulation from the flat to the slope and put in a dehumidifier? And yeah, let's do it. And that then was the basis that changed all of the building codes in the United States and Canada. So rich guy who owned a really interesting house in a hot, humid place that had a car company named after him, was responsible for changing American and Canadian building codes. That was one. Another one has a hotel chain named after him, and he had problems with mold, and I said, well, you need to get rid of the vinyl wallpaper on an air-conditioned building. We build all of our hotels this way. And I says, well, we should probably get rid of the vinyl wallpaper in all of the hotels, because when you're air conditioning, the inside is colder than the outside. Let me repeat this in case there are mechanical engineers here. If the inside is colder than the outside, and the second law of thermodynamics says that moisture flows from warm to cold. So if you're building in places where it's hot and humid in your air condition, moisture's coming in. And vinyl wallpaper is a vapor barrier on the inside, the wrong side. So moisture accumulates on the back of the vinyl. Now, mold doesn't have an internal digestive system, so it has to exude digestive enzymes outside of its body. So it basically pukes on the back of your vinyl, and the enzymes react with the plasticizers in the vinyl wallpaper, and you get pink and yellow and brown spots, and we call that the Marriott measles, the Radisson rash, and the Hyatt hives.
Nice.
He recommended me to a gentleman who used to be a famous fighter pilot, who's an ambassador from another country in a big place in Aspen, Colorado, where we built the largest house. I was involved in the largest house in the world at the time, 70,000 square feet. And it had the first unvented, vented roof structure in a cold climate, the first conditioned crawl space in a cold climate, and an insanely thick sweater. And so then rich people talk to other rich people, and then I started doing museums and art galleries, because who provides money to museums and art galleries? Well, rich people. Museums and art galleries have moisture and humidity problems because they're humidified and pressurized, and so are hospitals. And so, I started doing the hospital work because I was doing the rich people's buildings work. And I can't mention the names of some of the hospitals, but the veterans people love me. So there's a couple of them around the Washington, D.C. area that no longer have moisture problems.
So we are talking to one of the just amazing founders, innovators of this industry. And I hope that everybody that's watching this interview really appreciates the time that you're spending with us. I'm going to do what I call my fast round now. And it's just questions for fun. And it's so we can learn about you a little bit. What is your favorite room in your home?
The fireplace room, right here. And you're going to ask, well, why? Well, I like burning energy studies. Ask me where the combustion air comes from.
Where does your combustion air come from?
I open that window. And that's why I have high Victorian furniture, because when the air rushes past the back of the furniture, my back doesn't get cold while it's going to the fire to provide combustion air. So you're burning wood in a house that's 1 air change per hour at 50 pascals, and you are opening the window and you have Victorian furniture. You're wasting a lot of energy. Yes, but it makes me feel wonderful. And there's nothing more romantic than listening to Diana Krall singing with a candle lit while you're burning a fireplace with your window open, and Queen Victoria's furniture keeps you from getting cold.
And these are the things we need to do to be healthy. In your home, what's your favorite activity? I think you kind of answered this sort of from the first question, but what's your favorite activity to do in your home?
Well, believe it or not, I write. I know that's an unexpected answer, but I love writing. I've written several thousand papers, a dozen books. The old timers that taught me basically said, "Young Joseph, write. It's therapy for you. Don't call people bad names. Write the physics down. Then add humor to the footnotes, and that's good therapy for you." So I enjoy writing. And I also enjoy drinking red wine. Not white wine. It's got to be red wine. It's got to have a cork. It's got to come from Italy or France. Otherwise, we're not. That's it.
Very nice. And what is one problem that you have in your home that you're aware of that you have not addressed yet?
My 150-year-old chimney is leaking water because I've repointed it, and that I guess that would be maybe a 1 in 10, 20% possibility. The old timers would stucco it and the problem would go away. But I like and I love the brick. And so I've gone through all of the options except the last one, which is going to be adding some silane and siloxane waterproofing, because but my chimney is leaking. So you're a famous water guy and you're living in a house and your chimney leaks. Why should we listen to anything that you have to say? Exactly. That's my damn chimney leaks, but it's old and beautiful, and I don't want to put a stucco condom over it. I want it to remain beautiful. So, well, what's the risk with these waterproofing coatings? Well, some of them are too effective, and we end up with efflorescence and spalling. That's why you would never use silicone on brick. And I'm trying to find the right silane siloxane thing to work, and so I have a back of the yard test that you're experimenting on yourself. Yes, it's important to experiment on yourself and your brother-in-law, not clients. Okay, just letting you know.
And this is a common problem that chimneys and fireplaces do allow moisture to come in. And
Yeah.
then a bigger issue too is when you have a liner inside of that chimney that isn't being maintained. A lot of people have a terracotta liner and that becomes cracked. And then when you add water to that cracking and you've got all of your soot and creosote and all these things that build up in there, it becomes a mess. And I often tell my clients, if your house smells like a fireplace when you walk into it and you're not running the fireplace, you've got an issue. So
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
first things.
Well, we've got a nice lining. I run a fiber optic scope up and down, and I mean, I've got
Perfect.
I've got more videos of. I do proctology on my fireplace. Okay, just
That's good. That's good.
You can
That is
use
a
that.
necessary for chimneys. It is 100%. If you're going to,
That ain't the problem. I've now gotten rid of everything except the hygroscopic nature of 150-year-old brick, and I want to save the brick. Okay.
it's okay. It's good. It's good. And before we depart from our lovely conversation, can you give our audience something they can take away immediately and start doing in their home? Something economical that they watch us and they say, here's something you can start doing and it's going to make you healthier in your space.
Make sure your dryer is vented to the outside. Make sure that when you're cooking with your gas oven, your gas cooktop, that you have your range hood on a little bit and open the freaking door a little bit. It's important not to die. Okay.
Awesome. Tell us where everyone can find you and all the wonderful information that you've given us today and so much more, because this is just like, I mean, it's not even a 1%er here today. So where can they find you? Where can they learn more? Where can they come and learn about building and building science?
Well, if we're on my website, our website is buildingscience.com, www.buildingscience.com. And there are gazillion books you can order. but don't buy the book yet. I have 500 free articles that are not behind a paywall. They're called Building Science Insights and Building Science Digests. If you read all of them, you're never going to have to buy the book. The book is for something that you put on your shelf that you impress neighbors with. But the real information is for free. It's on the Building Science Insights. Each one of them is 5 or 6 pages long. So, read one a week. All right. And then I have no friends, so email me with a question. I mean, now look, I get 500 emails a day, 490 of them deal with banking opportunities in Nigeria and Viagra ads. I don't know how they know that I need those services, but I get rid of those and then I'll answer the 10. And if I don't know the answer, I'll send you to somebody that does know the answer because we're part of the network, right? And this is part of the deal, Carolyn. So all of us communicating and talking, creating our own network of contacts. That's why tie into the local AIA, tie into the local Builders Association, tie in to the networks, and then communicate, because that's how we're going to win this.
Excellent. I'm honored, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. You are a treasure and a love. Thank you so much.
Take care.